Fantastic. Okay, thanks, Rachel. We're going to go into the questions. So we're back to Slido, which is fantastic, and we're getting a lot of questions coming in. So the first one that we've got there that is of interest to people is a really important one about speaking to people from a culturally and linguistically diverse background and how they figured in this work. So I'll get Jelena just to quickly talk about how we recruited for business, but what I can say is these interviews were conducted in English. So there's certainly a direction for other work asking some of these questions in the language that people are most comfortable in down the track. So I think that's a really important point from Anne. But do you want to just add to that, Jelena?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Thank you for the question. So we did recruit a mix of very different small businesses, but we led conversations in English. So we had a mix of different backgrounds in that. I'd have to go back through specific sample and recruitment, but there was a mix of backgrounds.
Fantastic, thank you. Now, I think Jeff Hardy somehow managed to get a question to the top of the list, which is almost a policy question, I think, Jeff, but we'll see what we can add to it anyway. But there's this issue of renting and people using technology in a premises they don't own. That question has gone to, well, how might we incentivise that? But any more you can add on what people in those circumstances running businesses in rental properties said about technology, steps they were taking to manage their use given those constraints?
So it would be, that's right, so it would be the system that is within the rental premise where they were at. Most of them felt a little bit uncomfortable going outside of what's been followed within the building for a number of different reasons. And I think when we talk about smaller businesses in rented spaces that be behaving like they're behaving at home, so some of them might be a bit more mindful, but where we have a bigger business in a rented place that be really highly dependent about how the building's been managed. So when they talk about investment that could potentially help them manage their energy bills, they're talking about, well, who does it need to be discussed with? Is it because we are in a rental property? So that these are the questions that are being they're wondering, but not quite sure what the answer is there.
Brilliant, thanks.
They probably need help to understand how to do that as well.
Absolutely. So the next question from Heather, which has got 13 votes. I think there's two parts to this question. Firstly, it actually raises a methodological point because when you spoke to consumers, you didn't ask set energy questions. It was more organic than that. So you may or may not be able to shed light on that question. But something that I certainly noticed in the groups I went to was how quickly people went from a conversation about their service, the tariff, the deal, to the conversation about managing use.
Yeah.
I certainly saw that in the household cohort.
Yeah. It was very similar to SME. So they were mostly talking about not necessarily what predetermines the cost, but once they're there, what can they be doing to be managing that rather than going in.
Absolutely. So the next question from Adam goes to an important point as well, because when we talk about technology, there's a range of technologies. The actual renewable energy generation technology is just part of that that wider suite of technologies that people might think of, or indeed the things they might do to get control over the use in a more incremental way. I mean, that could be better insulation. It could be thinking about doing things at different times. My sense was that when people think about technology, they do tend to jump to the solar panel or the battery. Was there something in between?
They did jump, so you're absolutely right. But so if we again think about the circles that we worked through, the businesses are prepared to do anything to minimise the expense or anything to make sure that the business can operate reliably whilst minimising their expense. So from that context and from that point of view, I think an incremental change would be really beneficial. Whether they've thought about it in ways that you might think about it is probably I'm not entirely sure. They've probably gone to what they know most about, but if they can get hand on how the incremental change can happen, they would really appreciate that. I would say they would be open to working through it.
Which is kind of a nice lead into the second question there about why they go to renewables when in some circumstances I think the experts in this room would say, well, hang on, start with energy management. But perhaps it does highlight that issue around services and support to help them navigate those different challenges.
Yeah.
Yolanda's got a question about, I guess it's a more general question about energy futures, well, economic futures, not just in relation to energy. We saw that households, when they're initially prompted about the future, you get some of those anxieties coming through. Yolanda's listed some here that potentially on the radar, not just for households, but also for SME. Did that come through in the initial part of your conversation?
Not so much. Not so much. I think businesses were more concerned about what happens within their own realm of responsibility. Again, they're sort of consumed with, it's particularly smaller to smaller medium are more consumed about how am I going to survive, less thinking about bigger picture and what am I part of. I think the bigger businesses certainly, or the larger businesses, are recognising the climate change and the need to lead the conversation around this and implement things that will minimise the risk. I think we didn't have economic downturn being discussed or health outbreaks. I think we might have done our research. I think that potentially might be a conversation point at this point.
Certainly. So what have we got at the top of the list now? Okay, it seems that from the research that small business feel even more stuck than households, and that they don't necessarily have the agency or power in the market that they need. I guess it's another compare and contrast question, and it's a slightly different way of capturing at a very high level where we think business is at least to help us think through a response. Do you want to...
Yeah, businesses are feeling stuck. A number of reasons. They feel like they need an agent who's going to help them swift through all of that. I think similarly to households, perhaps the conversation is not, I think, as perhaps... I mean, households would like to see change, that's for sure, but businesses almost need that change right here, right now. I think that's what we've been hearing from them. Whereas households can leave on, so to speak. I mean, no, but that businesses are saying, hey, we spend so much energy, how can we go a little bit differently about this?
Excellent. And the next question, Craig's prolific, which is a good one, and it does go to one of the slight differences that came through, and that goes to SMEs' concerns and interest in reliability. Do you want to just speak to some of the experiences? I think that also had some interesting jurisdictional differences that are worth mentioning as well.
Yeah, we saw. I think businesses were more, perhaps the reliability is more on the table for them, especially where there is a high intensity business. For households, we did have some differences in states. Now, from memory, I think it was South Australia and when your brain just doesn't get there to that space.
Yeah.
But South Australia has been mentioned, and I think with businesses, where you have high intensity, where you have a requirement for off normal either business hours or machinery, I think reliability is top of mind really in many ways. So.
Thanks, Yelena. And that's probably not a bad segue into the next question, which is it's a really good one because you look to come up with a way of identifying groups of different businesses that made sense from thinking about their relationship with energy.
Yep.
And we did that via size and intensity. But then the message still being across those 4 quadrants that energy was really important. Do you want to just add anything to that perspective and potentially some of the differences that relate to well, not the tension, but the interesting interaction that Craig's identifying there?
So it is really critical for all different quadrants. So remember, these are the ends of the world that we highlighted on those ASICs, but there is anything in between there. I think it was recognised by businesses that energy is their lifeblood. They wouldn't be able to operate if they didn't have it, that sort of thing. There's deprivation there. But the way they thought about it and the way they allocated resources to that conversation really differed in those ends of the world. Did it answer?
Excellent. Now, Rachel's got a slightly different little exercise that we're going to jump into now.
I've got 2 things. We've got 2 things we're going to do. So, as we've gone through the process of starting to socialise this research into this community, some stories have bubbled up, and each one of you has a story, I'm absolutely sure. But I thought there was one story that perhaps, if we look at this research as a part of building empathy, for another client in another industry, they said something which I thought was really poignant, which was, once you start to work in an industry, you can no longer see that industry in the same way as your consumers do. And so the research that Jelena and her team have done is a part of helping us get back into the shoes of the consumers of the services we provide. And as I said, as we start to socialise, this one story came to light that we thought was really interesting. And if we set it in the context of going from unstuck to solution, or stuck to solutions, which was the theme that came out of the SME space, I'm stuck. I just wanted to ask if, Dale, would you mind sharing your story? Yeah. Well, Chris, maybe you could conduct the interview.
I'm quite certain a lot of you have heard this story before. My name's Dale Hollis. I come from Bundaberg. I manage cane growers in Bundaberg, and I also manage Bundaberg Regional Irrigators Group. We play a very vital role in that we convert water into sugarcane, which in turn is converted into rum. I think the other person who was along those lines could only get it to wine. Having said that, one of the things that we need to do is to put water on our crops, and to put water on our crops is fairly energy intensive. Most of our farms have around about a 45 kilowatt pump. So in 2012, after we'd experienced double-digit year-on-year price increases from 2007, we had a look at our gross margins and it didn't look very flash. We were cornered. We had to put water on the crop to get it to grow, and we couldn't afford to do it. So we sat down and we thought, we, being the sugar industry, have a few political contacts, so we went down the political route, and we actually defined what an affordable, sustainable price for irrigators was. And that was 8 cents ceiling for the electrons and 8 cents ceiling for the network components. And we didn't do that with just sitting cross-legged thinking about it, or what I'd call swag theory, which is simple wild-ass guess. We actually sat down with some fairly knowledgeable people. One of them had a surname called Finkel, and we figured out what coal was worth, what wind was worth, and all of those things. We became of the view that 16 cents was deliverable, and I think we're not far off proving that. Along the way, we also thought, well, we need to get our own house in order. Not all of our farmers are right up there with the modern gear and productive energy use. So we put 3 extension people out in the field. They did energy audits and productivity audits and came up with a whole host of solutions, most of which focused around variable speed drives, less energy intensive kit. We went to CEFC and they came up with a package that suited us, so that was the second work stream. And the third work stream was, geez, what happens if work streams 1 and 2 don't work? We're faced with shutting down the sugar industry, which is a major employer in our town. So we thought we need to go off grid. We need to be able to go off grid. We trialled one and it was an abject failure. Didn't work. We needed power 24/7. It did work on that farm sort of, because that farm had a few special attributes, but it wouldn't have worked across the district. Chance is a funny thing, because I was at a 50-year-old birthday party of one of my wife's friends, and I was sitting in the corner because I don't get on with most of her friends.
I love your honesty, Dale.
And there was another bloke sitting in the corner as well. His name was Probitz, and he was from a company called Reaqua, and I talked to him about our problem. And he said, we might have something that can help. And that was how we found the Zena Eco Drive. What it is, it's a piece of kit that sits between solar and another energy source. It favours solar, and then if solar's not enough to keep the pump going, it sucks what it needs and only what it needs from that other energy source, blends it, and the whole system's seamless. We went to Arena, and after a long and protected process, we partnered with Arena and we set up a system that's based on an 85 kilowatt solar system with the Zena Eco Drive hooked into Ergon's grid. And we partnered with a few other people. The Zena Eco Drive, Reaqua, Ergon, Queensland Farmers Federation, and our local irrigation contractor. Because it's not just power, it was actually the water energy nexus that we were trying to improve. We're just about finished that project, and I'm pleased to say it has worked like an engine in a bath of oil since it started. We can go off grid. We don't need the grid, and in fact, a diesel genset, the Zena Eco Drive can start it and keep it going just as happily as the grid. And we've identified that diesel costs us around about 23.8 cents per kilowatt to produce what we need. So that process worked very, very well. And along the way, we managed to get the Ergon board to come and have a look at what we were doing. And I'm pleased to say, following that visit, and with some help from some fairly influential people in Energy Queensland, we started to look at alternative tariffs and how we might be able to access it. Again, Ergon has helped immensely, and they've come up with a dynamic load control tariff. Currently, we've been trialling that with irrigators, and it works extremely well for sugarcane. I don't think it would work all that well for intensive horticulture, but it does for sugarcane, which is 80% of our membership. And currently that's costing us 19.6 cents per kilowatt. And if any recent discussions go, I think they'll be looking at 16.8 next year, which is still 0.8 of a cent above our 16 cents. What energy is for us, it needs to be affordable. Secondly, it needs to be optimised, and it needs to be individualised. So for irrigators, that means a suite of food and fibre tariffs to suit pretty much all aspects of agriculture. And I guess the important message is that we're no longer a corner demographic. We can go off grid if we have to.
So you've moved from stuck to a creative, collaborative, future-looking solution.
And
the answer is
as I said to one of colleagues here in the room that helped us from day one, and ECA has been instrumental in helping us along this track. One of the people that we said was that we've become an overnight success. It's just taken us 8 years to get there.
Well done. Thank you, Dale. Thanks for sharing. So, just one of, I'm sure, many stories in the room to orient us on a future thinking solution to help consumers go from stuck to a solution. give you space for 2 more questions, but just before we do, can I just, perhaps someone will be bold enough, could anyone share anything that was a surprise for them in the research that Jelena has addressed? Thanks. Chris, do you want to... Oh, so Chris is on a Get Fit program now to try and join my elite envelope delivery team.
Chris, that was record time, Chris. Phil Wilkinson, Minister for Air Conditioning and Refrigeration. I think our table all found it surprising that people actually thought the government were going to help solve the problem. I think that was one of the big things from our table. I thought it was a bit naive.
Okay, thank you. Any other surprises that anyone would like to share as we thank the Minister for Air Conditioning? Thank you.
It's a new portfolio.
Okay.
Pretty cool.
Sorry, my brain was working on
Why don't we just take the opportunity, Jelena? Is there anything you want to say about how people got to that point about government that can... Because people are obviously surprised about it.
Yeah.
Oh, you got this one.
Used to...
Yep. So they got to it themselves, I think perhaps a naive point of view, but there was a common need for some vision. I think at the moment, from speaking to everyone, there seems to be a bit of confusion around where we're headed. Are we this country or with that country? Where are we going to be? What role then subsequently are we going to play? I think that's where most of the conversation around, well, we need to start there into... I don't think anyone is saying government will solve it. I think they're saying they want that facilitated by government through, whether it's a vision, whether it's clarity, whether it's support, like businesses want support. So it's rather not a solution. Yeah, thank you.
I'll do it.
Just further on from that, because one of the observations I've made over the years, people say, they talk about government. Was there any distinction between federal government,
no,
state government,
both.
local government, policy, regulatory?
Both. Or government...
No distinction, or...?
Yeah. They were not very specific in saying who should be providing.
Say government.
Yeah.
We've got another question.
Adam.
Or is this a surprise statement?
No, an observation. So linking up the observation from Jeff's research about the net zero emission transition basically being half behavioural, cultural, and the other half tech, but I'm not seeing that behavioural coming through your... In fact, what I'm hearing from your research, but I'd like you to comment on it, is how you're seeing that behavioural self-initiated change coming through as opposed to arguably wishful thinking for, say, government leadership at the moment.
There was a recognition that consumers, both households and businesses, are prepared to do it. However, what they're talking about is they're not quite sure what that will mean and involve, and what would be the benefit of changing. I think there is willingness to change, is certainly coming through, but I don't know if you remember that slide to the what's the point mindset. I think there is a need, so it's that vision, but some sort of clarification around, if I'm changing today, what's the impact? Is everyone else changing? And it sort of hangs off that vision, where are we headed as a community, as a country? If everyone is in it together, then I can kind of feel my role has an impact, and it's going to be making a bigger influence, bigger change. They're willing to do it, but they're sort of saying, I need more information. And it goes back to the fact that currently what they're seeing is confusing. So they need, first of all, some sort of clarity around what does it mean, what am I paying for, how can I perhaps manage it in different ways. So I think it's a couple of things there that perhaps might be preventing the behaviour change. I think there is willingness there.
Thanks,
Does that
Jelena.
answer your...
I've got a question right up the back, and this might have to be our last question because Angela's motioning to me about hot food.
So it's Jeff Hardy hogging the mic again. So it's a UK observation on the government question, because we get similar findings in the UK, in that there is an expectation from consumers that those duly elected representatives should, have a mandate to go on and do something whilst in power, and therefore there is an expectation on government that there should be a vision coming forward that collects, all of those votes that went to their campaigns somehow. But it's a compact in the UK, so that consumers are prepared to pay for the transition. They understand that it does require money to flow, but they have an expectation that there will be also vision, certainty, other things provided by government, and that business is going to do their bit. So the investment is going to flow from business, that the business model is going to be commensurate with it. It's going to be an experience that helps consumers through it. So you get all of that going on, but it's the same in every survey in the UK. Government comes up as the first thing, the first port of call for certainty, for vision, for everything. So it's no different.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. So we might call it to an end there. That was another fantastic session. I'll get everyone to thank Jelena.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.